Imagine your proudest day, the day you finally graduate, filled with applause, smiles, and endless congratulations. Now imagine that day turning into the moment your entire world shifts, because the person you trust most, your mom, reveals a secret you never saw coming. What she did that day didn't just surprise me, it changed everything I thought I knew about my family, about love, and about life itself. Stay with me, because this is a story about truths hidden for years, life-changing revelations, and the quiet power of love that survives even the hardest secrets. Make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss the full journey of how one graduation surprise reshaped our family forever. I used to think graduation day would be simple, a moment of joy, relief, and pride. But I never imagined it would become the day everything I knew about my family, about myself, would begin to unravel. The auditorium buzzed with applause and camera flashes as my name was called. For years of struggle, sleepless nights, and silent fights had finally led to this moment. I spotted my mom in the crowd, dressed in an elegant navy dress, her hair flowing in soft curls. She was glowing in a way I hadn't seen in years. My dad sat beside her, clapping dutifully, but his eyes barely moved from his phone. Mom's eyes, though, they were all on me. And something in them made my chest tighten. Pride, yes. But something else too. Something deeper, softer, almost hungry. When the ceremony ended, my classmates scattered to their families, hugging, laughing, posing for photos. I walked toward my parents. Dad was already talking to a colleague on the phone, muttering something about a business dinner. Mom stood waiting, holding a small gift bag and smiling in a way that felt almost secret. "Congratulations, sweetheart," she said, pulling me into her arms. Her hug lingered, warm, trembling slightly. For a moment, she held me tighter than usual. I expected a book, maybe a watch, something sentimental. Instead, she drove me out of the city, into the quiet countryside, to a little place I didn't recognize, a charming lakeside cottage surrounded by trees and silence. "Your father doesn't know about this," she said softly, parking by the edge of the lake. "I wanted today to be just for us." There was a tremor in her voice, not guilt, but anticipation. As the sun dipped low, painting gold across the rippling water, I realized this wasn't just a celebration. It was the beginning of something I didn't understand yet, but would never forget. The drive to the cottage was quiet, but my mind wasn't. I kept glancing at Mom, her profile calm and unreadable as she focused on the road ahead. The golden light from the setting sun framed her face, and I could tell this moment meant something to her, something more than a simple graduation gift. When we arrived, the lake shimmered like glass. The air smelled of pine and memory. She parked the car near the water and turned to me, her hands trembling slightly as she held the small gift bag. "This place," she said softly, "was our secret once. Before you were born." I frowned. "Our secret?" She smiled faintly. "Mine and your father's, or at least, the man I thought would be your father." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" She exhaled, her eyes glistening. "You deserve to know the truth now that you're a man." I sat back, unsure whether to brace myself or breathe. She reached into the bag and pulled out a photograph, old, faded, worn at the corners. A young woman, unmistakably her, standing beside a man who wasn't my father. They were laughing, standing in front of this very lake. "I met him before I ever met your dad," she began. "He was the kind of person who made me feel alive again when I thought I'd forgotten how." Everything froze for a moment. He kissed her on the cheek, completely unaware that the foundation beneath his life had cracked open. I excused myself early and went for a walk. The air was sharp, the kind that makes your lungs ache. I needed to think, but my thoughts wouldn't stay still. Every memory with my mom suddenly had new weight. Every moment of affection, every comforting word, carried echoes of a truth she'd been hiding. I realized she wasn't just my mother anymore, she was a woman who had lived with choices, mistakes, and heartbreak I'd never seen. When I came back home that evening, she was sitting in the garden, the same photograph in her lap. She looked up at me, her eyes soft but tired. "I didn't tell you this to hurt you," she said quietly. "I told you because secrets don't die quietly. They take pieces of you as they go." I sat beside her, unsure whether I was ready to forgive or even understand. But for the first time I saw her not as the perfect parent I'd built in my head, but as a human being. That realization didn't heal everything. It didn't erase the confusion or the pain. But it opened something else, a space where truth could finally breathe. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Because in a family built on half-truths, one revelation rarely stands alone. The days after that night blurred together, heavy with unspoken words. At home, everything looked the same, but it felt different. The air carried something invisible, like a storm waiting for a spark. My mother moved through her routines with quiet precision, cooking, cleaning, smiling when she had to. But I could see it in her eyes every time she looked at me, fear that her truth might not stay buried. There were mornings when my father's laughter filled the house and guilt flooded me so hard I could barely breathe. There were nights when Mom would knock softly on my door just to ask if I was okay, and I could see that same guilt reflected right back at her. Secrets, I realized, aren't just about what you hide, they're about what you carry. It was a Sunday afternoon when everything came to a quiet crossroads. Dad was fixing something in the garage, humming a tune he used to play when I was a kid. Mom was in the kitchen, stirring soup, her movements slow and thoughtful. I walked in and stood by the counter. She looked up, startled. "You scared me." "I've been thinking," I said. "About what you told me." "About him." Her hand trembled slightly as she set down the spoon. "I shouldn't have told you that day," she murmured. "It was selfish of me." "No," I said, shaking my head. "It wasn't selfish. It was human. You wanted me to know the truth. And I needed to hear it." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't speak. "I thought about telling Dad," I continued, my voice quiet. "Every day, actually. But then I realized something. He doesn't need to know. Not because he couldn't handle it, but because it wouldn't change what's already real." I glanced toward the garage. "He loves you. And he loves me. And that's the only truth that matters now." She covered her mouth, trying to hold back tears. "You're protecting me," she whispered. She set her gloves aside and turned to me. "You have every right to feel lost. I did too, for a long time. But this," she gestured to the garden, to the house, to all of it, "this life only exists because I chose stability over chaos. I chose your father because he could give you a home." "And love?" I asked quietly. She hesitated, then whispered, "Love comes in different forms. Sometimes the one we give isn't the one we wanted, but it's the one we needed." Her words lingered in the air, fragile and heavy. I wanted to believe her. But part of me couldn't stop wondering if love built on silence could ever truly last. Later that day, as my father walked past my room, he paused at the doorway. "You know," he said, "your mother's been different lately too. Maybe you should take her somewhere nice. She's been through a lot with all your studies and everything." The irony nearly crushed me. He was worried about her, and I was the only one who knew why. That evening, I stood by my window watching them in the living room, my father reading the paper, my mother sitting beside him, pretending everything was fine. It was a picture of peace, of normalcy. But I knew better now. I knew the truth was always sitting quietly in the room with us, waiting for someone brave, or foolish, enough to speak it aloud. The decision sat inside me like a stone, heavy, unmoving, and always there. I carried it through the weeks that followed, pretending to live a normal life while my mind replayed every moment between my parents, every smile that now looked rehearsed. There were mornings when my father's laughter filled the house and guilt flooded me so hard I could barely breathe. There were nights when Mom would knock softly on my door just to ask if I was okay, and I could see that same guilt reflected right back at her. Secrets, I realized, aren't just about what you hide, they're about what you carry. It was a Sunday afternoon when everything came to a quiet crossroads. Dad was fixing something in the garage, humming a tune he used to play when I was a kid. Mom was in the kitchen, stirring soup, her movements slow and thoughtful. I walked in and stood by the counter. She looked up, startled. "You scared me." "I've been thinking," I said. "About what you told me." "About him." Her hand trembled slightly as she set down the spoon. "I shouldn't have told you that day," she murmured. "It was selfish of me." "No," I said, shaking my head. "It wasn't selfish. It was human. You wanted me to know the truth. And I needed to hear it." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't speak. "I thought about telling Dad," I continued, my voice quiet. "Every day, actually. But then I realized something. He doesn't need to know. Not because he couldn't handle it, but because it wouldn't change what's already real." I glanced toward the garage. "He loves you. And he loves me. And that's the only truth that matters now." She covered her mouth, trying to hold back tears. "You're protecting me," she whispered. "Maybe," I said softly. "Or maybe I'm protecting all of us." We stood there in silence for a while, the only sound the soft bubbling of the soup on the stove. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was something close to peace. That night, I walked out to the garden and looked up at the sky. The stars were sharp and bright, scattered like secrets waiting to be found. I thought about the man in the photograph, the stranger who shared my eyes, and I wondered if somewhere, somehow, he knew I existed. But I also thought about the man who raised me, who was still in the garage, humming, unaware of the truth that shadowed our family. And I realized that love, in its quietest form, doesn't always need to be pure to be powerful. A few days later, I framed the old photograph and tucked it away in a drawer. Not to hide it, but to honor it. To remind myself that every life is built on choices, some right, some wrong, and some that simply are. I never told my father. My mother and I carried that truth between us like a fragile thread, one that could never be cut, only understood. Years from now, when I look back on that day by the lake, I won't remember it as the day my mother broke a secret. I'll remember it as the day I learned what it truly means to love someone despite their flaws, despite the cracks in their story, despite the truths we never speak aloud. Because some surprises don't destroy a family, they reveal the strength it takes to keep it whole. This story is a true-to-life emotional confession. Some events and experiences may be intense or sensitive for younger audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. Subscribe now to hear more raw, real, and unforgettable stories that explore the hidden truths of life, love, and family. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true life confessions and emotional stories that remind us we're never truly alone. Your support helps us bring more powerful, real-life experiences to light. See you in our next video, where another truth will unfold.